there's one thing more I'd like to add to this. Is it working? There's one thing more I want to add to this resting in awareness practice, but before I do that, maybe there's some questions about that practice we've been doing today. Anyone have any questions? Oh, no questions.
I'm not sure. I feels like I'm not caught in thoughts or sleepy, but I'm sort of drifting away sometimes in this practice. It's like I'm
drifting away from
a more
so you probably
myself. I don't know.
Okay. Probably, and this can often happen with this practice, is that it's easy to drift into dullness. That because in this practice we're not paying attention to any appearances, because normally if we're having to, the practice from yesterday, observing, we have to sort of pay attention to observe. Whereas in this practice we're not interested in any appearances, so then we're interested in awareness, but then it's very easy just to sort of drift into slowly this very dull state. Because we're not having to pay attention to any particular things, just awareness itself, then there can be very much the situation where we're really drifting into a dull state. Of course, there's still some awareness there. I mean, if we're completely dull, we've fallen asleep or we're completely lost. And this is something we're going to actually see tomorrow evening when we start this chart. There's a thing called a rabbit here. And once we get into any of these practices, the rabbit is something we have to pay attention to, because the rabbit is this subtle dullness. And particularly in this practice of resting in awareness, it's very easy to drop into that. And it feels like I'm in the practice, I'm not paying attention to any appearances, I've got awareness, I'm good. And we get stuck there. Because what's missing is clarity. So therefore, we need to notice, and that's what we're going to talk about in this chart tomorrow evening, we need to notice when our mind is not sharp and sharpen it a bit without tensing. So that's probably what's happening with you. That's very common in this practice.
It's like I feel nothing, but I can feel that I'm in my body.
You feel
I feel
nothing.
the sensations of the body and the breath all the time.
Right.
Like it's like I understand there is something subtler, but the breath and the sensation take me. It's more familiar or more
Sure.
or more.
That's also very common in this practice, and also the practice from yesterday, observing the mind, is that often people who've done some sort of shamatha practice generally is the breath, and that's what they're familiar with. And so then they go into a different shamatha practice, observing the mind, resting in awareness, and suddenly they're focusing on the breath or going into the body. Okay, I mean that's
Take me.
of course, because that's our habit. That's been our practice. That's okay. I mean, then we just notice that and then just gently release that and come back. Gently release, come back. Gently release, come back. And also, of course, what we can do is what I've mentioned a few times, is then we could actually use that as the anchor for these practices. That if we're familiar with these practices, like the rhythm of the breath or something, is really just start there. And then a little bit in the corner of the mind, just notice the stillness, the awareness. That's where we start. That's okay. And then slowly pay more attention to that and a little bit less to the breath. And then over time you can move into that and let go of the breath altogether. So that's okay.
How can I deal with my the mind that is the kind of talking mind? It's either in everyday life, either in meditation.
So the talking mind, discursive mind, as I mentioned in the beginning of any of these practices, a little bit of talking mind actually can be useful because it can remind us of what to do, and so don't sort of knock it on the head at the beginning, because then we don't know what we're doing. But of course, if it still keeps talking excessively, then it sort of becomes a problem. But what we don't want to do, well, of course, in the practice we did yesterday, good, we've got something to watch, the talking mind. If there's talking mind, then there's lots of things happening, so we can watch that. And then the more we watch it, the less the talking mind will grab hold of us, because we'll start to be able to watch the talking mind instead of getting caught up in the talking mind. What we don't want to do is fight with the talking mind. If we fight with the talking mind always wins, always. So the two things we don't want to do is fight with the talking mind and submit to the talking mind. They're the two extremes. Either getting caught up in the talking mind or trying to squash the talking mind. Both of those will make it worse. So the middle way is just watch the talking mind. And of course, if we're doing the breath practice, then just let go and back to the breath, back in the body. So if you go back in the body, that can be a good way of not trying to get rid of the talking mind, but not giving it any energy. So the breath can be very helpful for the talking mind. The practice from yesterday, the answer is watch the talking mind. And don't have a preference to get rid of it. Otherwise you're fighting with it. So if it's there, just watch it. And the more we can sort of watch it, the less power it has, and slowly that talking mind will... But it could take some time, because many of us have got a very strong habit of the talking mind, the discursive mind. And in this practice today, if the talking mind is there, let it be there. It's okay, it doesn't matter. We're not interested. Again, not trying to block it, but just pay attention to the awareness. And again, if that talking mind gets hold of you in this practice, again, go back into the body. Use the breath as the anchor. And that way you get into it. But again, what we don't want to do is just feed the talking mind by getting caught up in it, or try to fight it and block it and get rid of it. Just watch it. I mean, it'll take time, because we've got strong habits. But if we just keep doing that, slowly we have a new habit. And the new habit is we don't really have such a big talking mind anymore. But it'll take time.
I had the same situation with fear coming up, like you said that it may come, and I didn't know how to handle it.
In this practice?
Yes,
yeah.
in the awareness practice.
So again, when it comes up, we can just notice it and not allow ourselves to get caught up in it. And again, we can understand that this sort of fear is just irrational fear, and not really pay it any attention. And then again, just go back into the into resting in awareness. If it's still grabbing us, then what we can do, again, not allow ourselves just to get caught up in it, and not try and get rid of it. But what we can do, if we're trying to just rest in awareness, it's still grabbing us a bit, then what can be helpful is to go into the body and look what's happening in the body relative to that fear. Obviously, there's probably some tightness or something. Just watch that. Watch it.
But then I watched it for a long time and it didn't pass, so I just watched
Right,
it
because we
practice.
wanted it to pass. So that's this.
Okay.
So if we want it to go away, it's not going to go away. So have this attitude, it's there, it's okay, it doesn't matter.
It's okay to watch it,
Yeah, just watch it.
but then I forget the awareness.
Right, but if you're getting caught up in that fear, then you're not in the awareness anyway. So we just want to do whatever we can to not get caught up in it. And the first strategy would be just to watch it. If we're still getting caught up, then move back from that and watch what's going on in the body relative to that. And if it's still there, then I would probably just go to the breath or something. So sort of like this. But again, have this idea if it's there. Because remember, whatever's there, fear, anxiety, whatever's there, none of these things can harm us if we just watch them. They can't. They can only harm us if we get caught up in them or we want to get rid of them. So if we can just be present, and again, this is something we'll need to develop. I mean, now we don't have that ability so much. We either get caught up or we try and suppress. But every time we can, when some little thing comes up, some anxiety, some fear, some irritation, every time we can just watch it, not get caught up and not try to suppress, we're improving our ability to watch these things. And then over time, we'll be able to watch stronger and stronger things, and they have no power on us at all. And then if some very strong thing can come, we can just be present. I mean, it'll be strong, but we won't get overwhelmed. We'll just watch it and go, oh, interesting. But it'll take time, of course. But if we keep doing that, then we will develop this ability to do that more and more.
I actually have 2 questions. I wrote them. But in continue to this question, when you say agitation and then relax, 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 and then not in opposite, but in the light of, in the light, I don't know. And then there's the kind of experiences that come that are unpleasant or like fear or sadness, and
Sure.
so is it not agitation?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Okay, because you said when the mind is agitated, just relax, relax, relax.
Yeah, if it's tense. If you have tension
Okay.
and distraction, then relax, yeah.
Okay, so fear is not this kind of experience, for example.
Well, maybe with fear you can get tension coming up as well. Sure. But of course with fear then we can just watch it.
Okay.
Because it's the fear that maybe is making us tense. And so if we watch the fear, then the tension will automatically go away. Because we just will dissipate. Other question?
Yeah, and the other question, I would like your response. I don't know if it's a question, but something like, I thought about this resting in awareness, and I thought about what you said about I also heard it before, some meditations like have a non-judgmental look. So can you talk a bit about the difference between the two? Resting in awareness and having a non-judgmental look inside.
Being non-judgmental is what we should apply to everything in our life. And non-judgmental, as I mentioned before, doesn't mean accept everything. Because we're normally stuck in cognitive fusion, so there's either accept or reject. And often then, if we're in that mode and we hear be non-judgmental, it basically means don't reject. That's what it sort of means, which means we accept. So often then people, and many of us do this cognitive fusion, and some people even explain non-judgmental as that way, that means accept everything. I mean, that's rubbish. That's ethical disaster.
Yeah.
Non-judgmental really means don't do cognitive fusion, because judging comes from cognitive fusion. So non-judgmental means don't do cognitive fusion, which means evaluate. We need to evaluate every situation, our own and others' behaviour and so forth. So that we apply in everything, in everything we do. There's another question? Or that's it?
That's it, but I was asking it also in the context of the meditation, the practice.
Right, in terms of resting in awareness?
Yeah.
Well, there, of course, the resting in awareness, I'm not sure if it's directly relevant, but certainly we wouldn't, in resting in awareness, not to get caught up in any appearances, but non-judgmental in resting in awareness.
It's like
I mean, what you could say there is don't react to anything, maybe. I'm not sure it really directly applies the non-judgmental in this context.
maybe it's a thought that says no, not like this, like that. No,
And of course, the other thing is to have sort of no preference.
it's a thought judging what's going on.
Yeah. But again, even in resting in awareness, we need introspection, no? The two tools, mindfulness, introspection. So introspection is doing the quality control. It's evaluating what's going on. And if we're noticing we're getting dull, we need to sharpen. If we notice that we're getting distracted, we need to let go and come back. So in that
But
sense...
the judging is it's a mental, it's a thought. You can do it without a thought, just to pay attention and to change.
Right,
Or
but
like
you have to...
like this, like
You have to notice something before you can change it.
yes,
Yeah. And that noticing is the introspection.
it's not a thought.
Thought. It's not something intellectual. It's just experiential. You just look and you see, oh, dullness, sharpen. Oh, distraction, relax. You don't need to think. Any other questions?
I want to ask, what, like, when I'm doing it, I'm getting most of the, from what's going on is very visual, like I'm watching a film. And
Right, but in this...
no, but
Oh.
every time I do it. So
Ah.
my question is, if like what's happening is that I'm getting a lot of visual information, almost any thought, like let's say I thought about my old house, I immediately saw it. Like everything becomes like pictures.
Right.
Does it mean anything?
No, probably just means you're a more visual person than others, that's all. I mean, but again, in this practice here, we're not paying attention to any of those visual things, but of course we're not trying to block them. Let them be there, they can be there, but we're just not particularly interested in them, and just focus on knowing that you're aware, that's all. That's it.
Like when you said that to be aware,
Sorry?
when you said to be aware of the space, what happened to me is that I imagined like the mind is the sea,
Yeah.
and then it was just like seeing waves and
I mean, again, as a beginner, we can use these analogies like the sky and space and the sea to help us appreciate something, but then we need to be careful we're not just visualizing the mind like that. But that idea or analogy can help us to get into the practice, but we need to be careful we're not, again, just visualizing things. Okay, one more thing here about the practice. When we go into Shamatha practice, and this is what we're going to do now, as I mentioned, the three main practices are Shamatha, and then the compassion and the vipassana, the wisdom. And they work together, they support each other. And particularly here in Shamatha practice, and particularly this practice we're doing now is very suitable for this, is that adding a little bit of vipassana from time to time can help us to go a little bit deeper into this practice, because this vipassana can help release the grasping, which is causing a lot the mental afflictions, and they interfere with the Shamatha practice. But so adding a little bit of this can help to go a bit deeper in shamatha. And that's what we're going to do now. And we're going to do it on the basis of some instructions, again, from Padmasambhava, who brought Buddhism first to Tibet. So again, this is coming from Attention Revolution from Alan Wallace on page 133. He says the following. After settling your body and mind in their natural states, you can simply be aware of being aware. You don't need to be in a sensory deprivation tank, and your mind doesn't have to be totally silenced. You can know with immediate certainty that a consciousness is present, and with no other object of awareness you can cultivate attentional stability and clarity of that awareness. Let's see how Padmasambhava describes this subtlest way of achieving shamatha. So now he's quoting again from a meditation text from Padmasambhava, who says, while steadily gazing in the space in front of you, without meditating on anything, steadily concentrate your consciousness without wavering in the space in front of you. Increase the stability of attention and then relax again. So here he's talking about this sort of balancing. You know, normally we either go sort of into dullness or into agitation, distraction. And so we can balance by sharpening the focus to overcome dullness and then relaxing to overcome tension. So we can be relaxed and alert. And so that's what he's saying here. Increase stability of attention and then relax again. But then he adds something more. He says, occasionally seek out what is that consciousness that is concentrating. Steadily concentrate again and check it out again. Do that in an alternating fashion. Even if there are problems of laxity and lethargy, that will dispel them. Meaning, if we introduce a little bit of questioning, which of course now is actually technically Vipassana practice, if we ask a question and we need to investigate on the basis of that question, then we have to pay close attention. So that's going to help overcome dullness, laxity, lethargy. So that'll sharpen the mind. So he says, do that a little bit and then relax. Do that a little bit, relax. So that's going to make the mind more sharp and relaxed at the same time, if we're alternating that. And then he says, cast your gaze downwards, gently release your mind, and without having anything on which to meditate, gently release both your body and mind into their natural state. So again, that's if we have any agitation, tension, lower the gaze, release awareness, and relax completely. Having nothing on which to meditate and without any modification or adulteration, rest your attention simply without wavering in its own natural state, just as it is. Remain in that state of luminosity, which means clarity, and rest your mind so that it is loose and free. Alternate between observing that which is concentrating inwardly and that which is releasing. If you think it is the mind, ask, who is it that releases the mind and concentrates the mind? Steadily observe yourself and then release again. By so doing, fine stability will arise and you may even identify pristine awareness. So pristine awareness is nature of mind. So what he's doing here is adding a little bit of questioning, vipassana, to sharpen the mind, and then we look a little bit and then we relax. Look a bit, relax. And that way we can be very sharp and alert and relaxed. And then he goes on to say, if you become muddled and unmindful, you have slipped into laxity or dimness. So clear up this problem, arouse your awareness and shift your gaze. So again, if you're getting very dull, drowsy, blank, then sharpen your mind and elevate the gaze. If you become distracted and excited, it is important that you lower your gaze and release your awareness. If samadhi arises, in which there is nothing of which you can say, this is meditation and this is conceptualization, you are slipping into a stupor. Stupor just means into dullness. So meditate with alternating concentration and release, and recognize who is meditating. In so doing, recognize the flaws of shamatha and eliminate them right away. So that's what we're going to do in this practice now. Is again, we're going to try and balance the mind so that we are relaxed but alert at the same time. And we're going to introduce a little bit of questioning. And when we have this questioning, we are to investigate on the basis of the question. So what we're not to do is try to intellectually answer the question. That's not Vipassana practice. So when a question comes, then we simply look based on that question. Because if we allow the intellectual mind to come in, then of course usually the intellectual mind always has an answer based on our personal belief system. But then we're not being an empirical scientist. If we want to be empirical, we need to let go of any sort of belief systems and just look to see what the reality is. So here, when questions arise, then just look. Don't try to intellectually answer. And here in this context, we're just going to look for a short time and then relax. Because the main purpose here of doing this looking is to sharpen the mind and then relax. So we're going to do that a little bit. So let's do the practice. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance.